You're listening to Uncle Sam Saves America, a patriotic show for the average Joe.
I don't think America's ever seen the coming together of a perfect storm quite like we have right now. We have giant political divide, not only left versus right, but each of those has factions within, and many of them are openly calling for violence. We have a giant culture gap, what is or is not acceptable, and within that is an ocean of violent rhetoric. We have an economic divide, not only monetarily, but we have economic ideological differences, and this has created more class warfare. We have religious faction building from three different sides, and some are signaling for violence. And finally, violence in general is just out of control. Whether it be random violence, gang related, drug related, or whatever, it's all gone too far. I don't believe that our country's ever seen an inflection point quite like this, not even in the Civil War era. This is unprecedented, right? Because our fragmented political divide, unlike the Civil War, which was largely Union versus Confederate, today's divide is multi layered, right? Left versus right, but there's also intrafactional battles with progressives versus moderates and populists versus rhinos. And it creates a kaleidoscope of conflict, rather than a single fault line. I always like that word kaleidoscope. Never get to use it in a sentence. We have a cultural legitimacy crisis. The question of what is acceptable has become a battlefield within itself. Speech, art, gender, patriotism, humor, even science have all fallen into cancel culture. This isn't just disagreement, it's a fight over the boundaries of reality versus identity. We have economic ideological warfare. Beyond the wealth inequity, there's a clash of financial worldviews, capitalism versus socialism, globalism versus protectionism, corporatism versus small business. And that ideological divide actually fuels more resentment than the monetary gaps do. We have religious fragmentation. Instead of one dominant religious conflict, we now see micro factions. And each of those are signaling violence or exclusion in their core values. And then there's generalized violence, right? In past eras where violence was kind of tethered to a single cause, today's violence is diffuse. You got political violence, racial violence, class violence, religious violence, gang, drug, random. It makes it feel like violence is everywhere all the time and it's out of control. What does that signal to America? This isn't two armies facing off, it's 1,000 fractures all at once. All evidence points to America sliding backward into feudalism. Feudalism isn't just a fair comparison, though, it's a haunting metaphor. Feudalism, also known as the feudal system, was a combination of legal, economic, military, cultural, and political customs that flourished in medieval Europe from the 9th to the 15th centuries, and in Japan from the 11th to the 19th centuries. If we broadly define it, it's a way of structuring society around the holding of land in exchange for service or labor. But today, instead of the land holdings, this is centered more around cultural and ideological differences. This neo-feudal frame kind of captures what's happening with all the fragmentation, the loyalty to party politics, and the economic tensions that are going on. Let's break this down a little further. All right, now I'm going to use Marxist theory here. Maybe I'm going to try to kill two birds with one stone. Please do not dishonorably discharge me for this. Karl Marx developed the ladder of what he called the ladder of historical materialism, which claims that societies evolve through distinct economic stages driven by class struggle and contradictions in production. According to his theory, this ladder, the bottom rung, was primitive communism. It was early communal societies based on shared resources, basically the hunters and gatherers. And from that emerged slavery. That was the emergence of class division with masters exploiting the slaves, which strong versus the weak. And from the emergence of that, after rebellions and those kinds of things, evolves feudalism, This is where lords and vassals dominate, and the peasants are bound to the land, and that was called a serfdom. The next rung on the ladder is capitalism, which is where we're at right now with private ownership of production, wage labor, and industrial growth. On Marx's ladder, socialism and communism, collective ownership, abolition of class divisions, and a stateless society are the highest rungs on this ladder. But history has actually shown us that the ladder is not a tall ladder like it shows here, but it's more like a painter's ladder. And history has shown us that capitalism is the top step, the one that you're not supposed to stand on because it's the hardest to balance. But it gives you the most reach. That's capitalism, right? Historically, the ladder looks like this. It's capitalism as the apex, the top step, maximum reach, but it also maximum risk. It's where balance is hardest to maintain, but it's also where the greatest view and greatest potential exists. If you slip backward one direction, you fall off back into feudalism. If America was to lose its footing and not move forward, it collapses into fractured sovereignty, vassalage, factional violence, kind of like what's happening. Right? If you fall off the other side into socialism or communism, there's no rungs to grasp onto. You just fall straight into the abyss. Once you step off that apex, there's no gradual descent. It's a plunge straight into collectivism, erasure of individuality, and systemic collapse. There is no higher rung than capitalism. Capitalism is the peak. There is no next step up. So the only question is whether we're going to hold balance or whether we're going to fall. And no matter which side you fall to, down the rungs or over the cliff, it's most likely that you're going to spill paint all over the place. You're going to make a giant mess that you're going to have to come and clean up. Today, of course, it's not simply about economics. Today, it's just as much cultural and ideological as it is economic. If we compare the dynamics of what's happening today, feudalism is becoming an accurate description of America's current direction. Power factions, right? Instead of a republic, authorities are fracturing across political lines, corporate monopolies, media ecosystems, and activist movements. Each of them are acting like a feudal lord. Economic vassalage, right? We're bound to debt, wage stagnation, cancel culture, digital platforms. Social justice warriors, subscription economies, algorithmic gatekeepers, they all function like a modern serfdom. Protection for loyalty. Political factions and influencers demand loyalty to their ideology in exchange for protection from cultural, economic, or ideological bullying and critique. Upward mobility shrinks today as elites consolidate influence, politicians consolidate power, and corporations consolidate wealth, all while the ordinary citizens are just clockwork in the machine. And then we have factional violence. Just as the medieval lords used to wage territorial wars over land, today's factions actually clash over political, racial, religious, economic systems, ideologies, and ways of doing things that are destabilizing our broader system. Unlike the Civil War, this cultural shift isn't a binary fracture, right? We're regressing into a system where sovereignty is fragmented, loyalty is transactional, violence is normalized, the truth, shared vision, and civic trust has eroded. America risks becoming a patchwork of competing fiefdoms and demanding allegiance, each of them offering conditional protections, but none of them are capable of unifying us as a whole. And without that, America is at real risk of slipping into feudalism.
You're listening to Uncle Sam Saves America, a patriotic show for the average Joe.